Welcome to the Data Democracy. Presented by renowned O'Reilly author Ole Olesen-Bagneux. Empowered by Xenia. Make your data accessible and discoverable by anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Hi everybody, I'm Ole Olesen-Bagneux, Chief Evangelist in Xenia and the author of the Enterprise Data Catalog published by O'Reilly. On the Data Democracy, we talk about data and AI with pioneering data practitioners and data leaders. Today's guest is Winfried Adalbert Etzel. Winfried is one of the most prominent voices in the data community in the Nordics and host of the MetaDAMA podcast that I strongly recommend. I met Winfried a couple of years ago when he wanted to do an interview about me and my first book, the Enterprise Data Catalog. And I must say I was very impressed by the structure, by the depth of the analysis and the questions. It's a really great podcast, and Winfried has a very, very succinct approach to the data field. Okay, my 3 takeaways from my conversation with Winfried. First of all, in this episode, you will hear how you can really build a very strong data community. The DAMA chapter in Norway is very, very strong, and it's very uniquely strong in the sense that it has a lot of events and a lot of activities going on. It also communicates in a very smooth fashion, so I suggest you listen to the episode to learn more about that. Okay, the second takeaway is that AI summers and AI winters come and go. It is no secret that right now it's AI summer. A lot of people are very enthusiastic about AI, sparked by generative AI in particular. And we discuss how long this summer will be and what will come after it. So you can also hear that in this episode. And finally, we talked a lot about data and AI strategies on this episode. Winfried has drafted some quite unique data and AI strategies, and he has really learned a lot about it. And they do not differ that much from what preceded them, the data strategies. It's more the narrative in the strategy that changes, not the strategy itself. So you can also listen more about that in this episode, but enough of me talking. Let's hear what Winfried has to say. Hi, Winfried.
Hey, Ole.
I'm happy to have you on.
Fantastic to be on. And I've been listening to your podcast, since you started, really. And it's such a pleasure to finally be on the show as well.
Well, thank you. I'm obviously also a big fan of your podcast. I've been listening to it for a long time now, since I discovered it. And I guess for the listeners, would you care to explain a little bit about what you do and where you're based?
Sure. So my name is Winfried, which is not a Scandinavian name, really. I'm originally from Germany. I've been living in Norway for, I think it's more than 15 years now. And I live the last 10 years in Stavanger, west coast of Norway, which is fantastic for the few days we have sunshine. And so I've been working in data and information management really since I've started working. My first job as a consultant in Oslo at that time, worked with public agencies to help them ensure that the information they're having is secured, is accessible, and understood. And then it developed kind of step by step, and now I'm working with data governance mainly, and data management in general.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting. And I can't say I have had a completely similar work experience, but there are overlaps. And I think some of the things that we've been discussing that I also mentioned in the introduction is that, like, if you've worked in adjacent disciplines to data management, you come with this slightly different perspective on data management that really sometimes can be a burden, but also give you some very, very rich perspectives to share with your colleagues and stakeholders and peers. I guess you had some kind of experience that resembles.
Oh, definitely. I'm always joking about that. I studied history, political science, and law, which is like the direct way into working with IT and data. But it kind of is interesting, really. And you are right. There are different perspectives you bring to the table. If you just think of history as like a field of studies, what you really do is looking at sources of information from a certain context, written by a certain person with a certain intention. And the only way to ensure that you get the understanding of that source or of that information is really by looking at the context, looking at the purpose, looking at when is it written, by whom is it written, and what did they want to achieve with it. And I think we do the same thing with data as well.
Absolutely right. I think that is a very, very true statement, and it's one of the things that, like, for me, it's circles, right? It's circles of reasoning and events, and it always comes back to these human sides of data, where disciplines that have been working with sources, authentication, quality, provenance, all that, it comes back again and again, of course, in new technologies, but it's as if, like, I won't say the data community is naive, that's not it. It's just that it's not accustomed with these discussions because it's a technology field, and technologists tend to not take into account the human element of data management and technology, right?
Oh, definitely. And I think we should talk a bit about this because I think this is really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
And I always wondered why IT is so much about technology and so little about information in the way we do it. I think it's kind of interesting that there is a certain notion about how we do data that is quite similar to how we did or are still doing IT, rather than a notion that how we do data should be similar to how we do business in general. I think there is a problem in viewing data as part of IT, and the whole idea about IT as a service to the business, and then data eventually also being a service to the business. I think that is an idea that is outdated. I think we are looking back to like what the 90s, service management and ITIL. And yes, it had his purpose at the time, but we are at a stage now where really data is an integral part of the work we are doing everywhere in the business. So we can't really divide the work as much as we have done it before with IT.
No, I agree. I think we have some management disciplines or work ways of working that clash here, right? IT service management, ITIL, is is a way of working that like had its heydays. I can't really pinpoint it exactly, but it has to be like 30 years ago. That was, I guess, the real heydays of IT service management and ITIL. But that's not to say that ITIL has become obsolete, right? In fact, not at all. It's just a different way of managing certain aspects of IT, and that definitely clashes with, for example, the DevOps movement. The DevOps movement that wants to have agile, fast deliveries for the business, with the business, and complete synchronization between development and operations, which is something that, in an ITIL point of view, is somewhat different, right? I think in most companies, I just yesterday heard Gene Kim say that he didn't think that startups had any interesting problems. Like, it's just small, boring companies. It's only when companies get a certain age and a certain scale that the technology problems become interesting. And I think one of these reasons for it becoming interesting is that you have these these ways of working that clash. I mean, obviously today, if you look at it from a theoretical angle, data shouldn't be part of IT, right? IT shouldn't be explaining what data the business has. Business knows that way better than the IT department. But it's just like these different ways of working that clash and collide and intermingle in a it's just a big mess. if you're not able to like perfectly distinguish and explain this context to both IT and the business, I guess. Have you had a lot of experience in terms of, like you mentioned, you did consultancy? You had any success in explaining these differences? And
I feel like I always had a harder time talking to IT leaders than talking to business leaders. And I think it's about, on the one side, understanding the problem, on the other side, how do you communicate? And I think that on the IT side, you really communicate in like a technical way, which is good because you kind of create a certain lingo that you can gather around and build an identity around. The bad thing is it's not the same lingo as the rest of the organization uses, and then you have a clash there. And I mean, we've seen the same stuff with data as well, right? We're building certain terms, certain structure that is really intuitive for us working in data every day, but for everyone else, it's really hard.
Exactly. This is the Data Democracy podcast. I guess one of the reasons why IT leaders have had such a difficult time accepting this reality is because they are the ones giving away power, or have to accept that they give away power, because IT traditionally has a lot of authority, can decide who gets what in the business in terms of services and applications, all that. Obviously, that power play is hidden in most organizations, but at the end of the day, IT departments were the ones pulling the strings in terms of what was decided and what wasn't decided. And that power, with the rise of cloud and the democratization of IT, and certainly the democratization of data in the advent of cloud, that power has been lost in IT departments, right? So they are reluctant to, certain IT departments are a little reluctant to accept that reality. But it's like, I think the drama of it is that they can accept it or not, but it's going to be there anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the business can buy solutions, can buy IT without any or very little engagement from IT. And so if they do that, and IT does not engage with them, then we have a problem in terms of IT spend and so forth.
I mean, from a data perspective, and we talked about this before, you and me as well, that there is a well, if you want to federate the work you're doing around data, if you want to really involve all the business units in your organization and really get them to take ownership and responsibility of the data they are producing, they are using, they are storing, they are even deleting, you need to start somewhere with a certain level of maturity, right? And for data, it's always, you need to build that level of maturity centrally. That's what we talked about for years. Build it centrally, and then you federate it out. And I still think it's a good idea to build a certain foundation to stand on, but you really need to federate out afterwards. And that is the tricky part. Once you build up centrally a foundation, you're starting in that power play, right? And you're like, oh, now I built up like an organization centrally that has a certain power. Why would I federate it out again? And this is something breakthrough.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of drama built into that. A lot of misconceptions also. I mean, many people that run centralized solutions are under the illusion that they can keep this monopoly of data in their solutions, in their monoliths, even though the rest of the business disagrees and just start spinning up small warehouses and storage solutions, whatever, all around the business. So it can be, things are certainly changing. Anyway, this was a wonderful detour, Winfried. I prepared a lot of questions also, and I do want to touch on some of them also to help you promote the DAMA community in Norway that I've been following. Also, as I mentioned in the introduction, for a long time. I think that you are really doing some excellent work up in Norway. So I want to touch a little bit upon that. And I want to, first of all, know, you have a newsletter. It's called the Data Nugget. What's the Data Nugget?
Yeah. Well, let's start one step back. And this is quite interesting because this year in June, we're going to celebrate our 5-year anniversary of DAMA Norway. So really looking forward to that. So 5 years ago, 2 people met in Oslo, and they talked about that there is a lack of a community where you can talk with your peers across organizations about data and data management. So that's how it started. And one of the first ways we tried to communicate was the Data Nugget, and that's our newsletter that was established. And the idea of the Data Nugget is to give kind of a nugget, a condensed version of information. So the newsletter is really not a lot of different articles, but it's rather a condensed version of certain important articles that some of our writers found during their research. And it's really, you don't need to spend much time on reading it, but you get an idea of the state of data, really. And that is a newsletter that really has developed through the years. We have an own editor for the newsletter, and we have writers that are exclusively writing on the newsletter. And then us in the board of DAMA Norway, we also engaged and tried to contribute.
I love it. And can you share with the listeners, Winfried, who were the 2 founding persons of DAMA Norway then?
Yeah, that was Maria Negård, and she was the 2nd president of DAMA Norway, and it was Geoffrey, and I have to double check his last name because he's Dutch and it's kind of hard to pronounce, but it's Geoffrey from Isendorn Yoshi.
Okay.
And he was the first president of DAMA Norway.
Okay. And that's 5 years ago. Yeah, a lot of things has happened since, and I think there's a DAMA chapter, like the DAMA, the Data Management Organization International, is organized in chapters, and I think the Norwegian chapter is very, very like inspiring and very professional. So besides the Data Nugget, you also have the podcast associated with DAMA Norway, and as I said in the introduction, you run that podcast, right?
Yes, because that's kind of interesting that throughout those 5 years with DAMA Norway, there were certain people that came into the board and they brought some new ideas in, right? And maybe the podcast was my idea that I brought to the table. But I've been running the podcast now for 3 years. I'm going into the 4th year now. And it has been such a pleasure to talk about data management in the Nordics. And I mean, the podcast is exclusively focused around the Nordics and trying to give an arena and promote Nordic data professionals and the work they are doing.
Yeah, and I really love the podcast. I listened to it with a lot of interest. And I think one of the things that makes it very unique is that it's both in Norwegian, that I can understand, being Danish, and in English. So you have this both national and international dimension in the podcast, and I think it gives a broader perspective in terms of the guests you have on, and I really like the podcast. And what made you come up with the name MetaDAMA?
That's a bit of a wordplay, but 3 years ago when we started, there was a lot of discussion about Facebook and Meta, that they just changed their name, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that was a bit of a hint there, but there's also, obviously there's an importance of metadata in what we are doing. So it kind of felt natural to call it MetaDAMA because we are talking about DAMA. That's how it started. But then we talk about so much more, right?
Yeah, obviously. Okay, great. So, in general, what kind of events do you do in DAMA Norway?
So we changed the strategy a couple of years back, and we said that we don't want to do like one big event a year and that's it. We want to be present as much as possible. So rather than doing like one huge event a year, we focus on doing one bit smaller, but one event every month. And we did that for a couple of years now. And it takes a lot of effort, especially if you do it voluntarily besides your day job, right? But it's really giving back, and it really also helps us to be present. And that also gives us the possibility to talk about a lot of different topics, right? Mm-hmm. So we have webinars, invite people to talk about a certain topic. We have workshops, we have participate in conferences, we do presentations. So there's really a lot of variety to the events we are doing. And also when it comes to the topics. So we talked about data mesh a lot. We organized the data mesh meetups in Norway for a period of time. We talk about AI is coming up now, right? AI governance. And really a broad variety of topics that are connected to data management.
That sounds like a great strategy, like having a continuous dialogue with all the members and what's happening out in industry. I'm curious, now you mentioned data mesh. I mean, how do you think, what's the current state of data mesh out there? People still eager to talk about it? Has the nature of the conversation changed? What's your impression?
Well, I think the focus has changed a bit, yet it's still relevant. Mm-hmm. It's at the same time more of a topic that is condensed to the data community. So if you look at like AI, everyone's talking about AI.
Yeah.
And we have seen both internally and in our company, but also externally, that there's a change between push and pull. While earlier with AI, there was like data scientists trying to promote solutions out to the business saying, oh, look at that. Isn't that something you could use? And now it's the opposite way around. People from the business come to us and say, can you do something about this? I mean, AI, right? That's not happening with data mesh. Data mesh is really condensed around the data community.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think that we are going away from that big paradigm shift thinking around data mesh. I feel at least that way. That data mesh is not so much about changing everything about the way we are working, but it's more about really talking about scaling. And for me, that's the core of the work we are doing with data mesh, right? It's about scaling the data work into the entire business. It's not so much about changing the ways we are working. That's part of it. But the real focus is about scaling.
Yeah, agreed. That is like the key parameter for success in a data mesh. That is the capability of scaling your data infrastructure, right? Because it's it's kind of the whole point that these monoliths are unscalable, big enterprise data warehouse and so forth. Okay, but this is actually also a very nice segue to the next question, because I mean, you have been putting forward quite a lot of thoughts on data and AI strategies. So, what's it like to create a data and AI strategy, and how does it differ from simply a data strategy?
I don't really think it differs that much. I think it's more about what narrative are you building around the work you're doing, and how do you get the buy-in you need. And we talked a bit about the, I can call it the hype around AI, right? And AI is kind of a segue to get a lot of the strategic work that we on the data space been thinking about and working with for a long time, really out there. So we talked about data strategy for a long time, and certain organizations have implemented a very well organized, structured data strategy, very polished data strategy, but many organizations don't really care about that part, because there's no ultimate or direct business value to be gained from. That comes in the long run, right?
Yeah.
So AI opens up a door. It says, well, there's something new out there. We don't really know how to handle it for an organization. We need to strategize around it. And then it's kind of a nice way to say, well, let's strategize around AI, but AI is really connected to data. So we need to strategize around data as well.
So is that is that the narrative that you were talking about in the beginning of the answer? Would that be the narrative, or do you have a specific narrative, like, I don't know, a business domain, specific use case? What would be the narrative?
Yeah, I think that's the idea behind it, and then the narrative needs to be adapted to the different business units, because you have different needs and you have different. Already talked about maturity levels in the organization, and you need to tailor your approach to that. There's something universal around the strategy work you're doing, right? You don't want to have like a data strategy for every department.
Oh no,
it's going to be tricky. And ideally, in a mature organization, well, if your organization calls itself data driven, it really should have data as a strategic element in their business strategy.
Yes, I cannot disagree in that. But it is a field where there's a lot of talk and less of people actually walking the walk, right? I think that's the big problem, both with data strategies, and I assume it will also be the case for many data and AI strategies, that they are declarations, they are aspirations, but they are seldom materialized. Is to what degree do you agree in such a statement? Do you think that is right, or do you see something different unfolding with AI as a sort of promised land that can really pull these strategies be executed?
Really good question. I think there are two preliminary questions you need to ask yourself. And the first would be, what is the strategy?
Yeah.
There's a YouTube clip from Roger Martin, which is quite short, but has, I don't know how many million views now. And the clip's title is "A Plan is Not a Strategy." And I think there's very much confusion around what is a strategy and what is a plan. In businesses, if you do forecasting, if you do resource planning, that's planning, right? It's not strategic work. And strategy is really trying to build a possible logic of how you reach a certain goal you have set yourself, right? So if you have, as a business, have set a goal to become a data-driven organization, let's say that, because many businesses have that, then you can't really plan for that because you don't really know what's going to happen around the next corner. But you can strategize around it. You can build a logic. You can say, these are the things we are expect will happen, and these are the actions we're going to take. And that will change. I mean, we're talking about different set of strategies, but I mean, emerging strategies that are changing constantly and you're adapting constantly are probably the ones that most organizations use, that kind of planning. But you need to have that understanding that you are not doing the planning work. You are actually strategizing and you're building a logic. And there is an element of uncertainty connected to it.
That's a very good answer, Winfried.
That's the one thing. And the second thing is that people forget to ask why. Why do I need a data strategy? Why do I need an AI strategy? What effect will it give me as an organization? And this is really where you focus around what is the goal we want to achieve with that. And it's really hard to build a strategy towards something that is not defined clearly.
These are excellent points, Winfried. And I think about this in not so much in terms of specific strategies or strategizing as an activity, but more in terms of terminology. I mean, we had data strategies and a data era. Prior to that, perhaps you could say there was a big data era, but now we're entering into something that will be called data and AI for a couple of years, maybe a decade, who knows. And I can't help but think, what of these two words will disappear first? Will we see the word data disappear and we just have AI strategies in the future and AI ambitions? I think a lot of AI advocates would say that. Maybe AI will disappear again because it disappoints. Maybe both terms will disappear because both terms are disappointing. So I'm thinking a lot about that, and I don't have a clear answer on that. But since you mentioned that this is something that will change over time, I feel like asking you, Winfried, what do you think the future holds for data and AI?
I feel like the term data is much more stable. I mean, we've been through a period where we talked about data analytics, right? Yeah. Now we're talking about data and AI. I think when I started looking into the governance side 10 years ago, we talked about information governance. Yeah. That changed to data governance. I mean, there's still some people talking about information governance, but data has really taken over on the space.
Yeah.
And so I think that data is kind of seen as the granular basic term that everything else is built upon.
So if you are to come back in, say, 3 years on the podcast here, Winfried, should we take a bet? And I say, well, I think maybe we agree, actually, that it will be called data. AI is less certain. Is that what we both anticipate?
I think so, yeah. And if you look at AI and the development it has had throughout, the last 40, 50 years, there has been a lot of talk about AI on certain points of time. I think we'd call them AI summers, and I think we are in the middle of one AI summer right now.
Yeah.
And for all the nerds out there, winter is coming.
Winter is definitely coming, Winfried. I couldn't have said that better myself. There's so much noise, right? I mean, the world runs on machine learning, and a lot of things that people call AI is just machine learning. Let's be honest about that. So that illusion in itself will create the end of the current summer, because people will realize once they get into the technological details or get disappointed about the outcomes from the technologies that they buy, that the eternal AI summer is far, far away. So I'm sure that there will come a winter again and a summer again afterwards.
I like that you ended it on a positive note there.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly haven't been around long enough to really assess in depth if this current AI summer is more fluffy than the previous summers. But I do think that in terms of the mediation of AI this time with the chatbot being capable of telling stories, it's a really hypnotizing, mesmerizing mediation of generative AI, right? And so that created in itself an enormous amount of hype and excitement that I can definitely understand, but that can definitely also backfire in terms of promises not being met or expectations not being met. And I don't know if previous AI summers were just as unrealistic. I simply don't know.
I don't know. If you look at like movies from the 80s,
Yeah, okay.
I mean that's an expression of that AI summer at that time, right?
Sure.
And
sure.
it really is a strong part of pop culture in the 80s. And it's kind of the same now. What the difference I see is that we are much more aware of risks. We are much more, we're talking much more about responsible AI than I think we have ever done. And the principles around it, the structure around it, is much more evolved. So maybe that's for me at least one of the big differences.
Yeah. And once again, you managed to tie history and technology together. Winfried, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you. I hope you enjoyed being here.
Oh, definitely. And I hope that you will also return to MetaDAMA at one point. Maybe talking about metadata. That would be interesting.
Definitely. It would be a great pleasure, Winfried. Let's agree on that. And thank you for being on.
Thank you so much.